Hello and welcome to News in Depth with me, Ashim Kumar. Ukraine urgently needs more Patriot interceptors as Russia intensifies its ballistic missile attacks. But Kyiv's European allies have limited stocks and growing security concerns of their own. In Poland, meanwhile, political tensions over history have made further military support increasingly difficult. So how much can Europe really provide? Well, to discuss that, we're joined by Stuart Dowell, our political editor. Welcome.
Hello.
Great to have you back.
Good to be here.
As always. So again, as always, we kick off with a short soundbite, and I'll get your view on it.
Okay.
It's President Foreign Minister Sikorski.
Let's just remember, there's a long-term, lavishly funded Russian operation to set nations against one another, in particular Poles against Ukrainians, because the Russians think that if they could set Poland against Ukraine, this would upset Ukrainian logistics and would help them win the war. And we can have all kinds of opinions about the past, but geopolitics hasn't changed. If Russia conquers Ukraine, this would be bad for Poland.
Well, I mean, he's got a point, hasn't he? I mean, at the end of the day, irrespective of the friction that currently exists politically between Poland and Ukraine, at the end of the day, if Ukraine isn't supported to its fullest, or to the fullest extent possible, then there is a risk that Poland's going to have Russia on its borders, isn't there?
Yes, that's right. That's a good summary of the relationship. I think the relationship between Poland and Ukraine at the moment is it's just about hanging on to this strategic consensus. That Ukraine is necessary for Poland's defence, that Ukraine is fighting for, not just for itself, but for Poland and then other countries on the eastern flank. But I would also describe the relationship at the moment as being the two sides being decapitated.
Right.
But the two heads, the two presidents, there's basically no relationship between them at all. The relationship is completely broken down. And I think that any improvement in that will have to wait for changes in president on one side or the other. But the body still functions, that there's still cooperation with logistics, with intelligence, with training, with funding through other mechanisms in the European Union and NATO. So it still works, but that strategic consensus is very brittle, at least on the right side of Polish politics,
right.
I would say. A few weeks ago, the Law and Justice candidate for Prime Minister Przemysław Czarnek actually said that Poland shouldn't, or should work so that Europe doesn't send weapons anymore to Europe. Jarosław Kaczynski, the leader of that party, walked that back and said, no, we still have to support Ukraine in that way. But that's an example of how brittle that strategic consensus is at the moment.
Right. Now, you see, there is a danger, isn't there, and I wonder if you'll agree, Stuart, that this is this friction about President Zelenskyy honouring the Ukrainian, I forget the name of the party now, insurgent army, who are accused of killing, almost certainly have killed about 100,000 Poles during the Second World War. President Zelenskyy honouring them, really, I mean, the timing was terrible and all of that, and we've discussed that many times on TV World. But at the end of the day, can this discussion not go on in the background and the reality of the situation be kept front and centre? I mean, what is stopping the Polish government and perhaps the Ukrainian government from doing that, from separating the two out?
Well, on the Polish side, there's too much on the right hand side, the right wing of Polish politics. There's just simply too much benefit to be had.
So it's political.
Yes,
right.
To a large extent. There's
right.
too much benefit to be had from keeping this issue going. That the right-hand side of Polish politics is fragmenting. After 20 years of it being consolidated under law and justice, it's fragmenting towards the right. There are 3 or even 4 entities on that far right, depending on how you count them, that are all competing for nationalist voters. Nationalist voters in Poland are Ukraine skeptic, and being tough on Ukraine, particularly on historical grievance issues, is very popular with them. Proof of that is that, for example, President Karol Nawrocki's approval rating has jumped 10 points since May. So people obviously like what he's done, even though you can argue that it was unwise and irresponsible because of the strategic consensus that we talked about. People like it, and there are political benefits on that side of politics.
Right. I mean, currently we're showing some numbers about the attitudes of Polish society on supporting Ukraine, and we see that the latest ones in 2026, we see that 47%, almost half of the population are against Poland supporting Ukraine. So I mean, with Polish elections coming up, this is not only something that the right is considering, it's also something Prime Minister Tusk has to consider, doesn't he?
Yes, if you look at there are all kinds of polling in recent weeks, and all of them show a move towards either less support for Ukraine joining the European Union, definitely very low support for fast-track membership, less support for supporting any more refugees. That's low at the moment. Less support, although I think it's still a majority for funding and supplying weapons, but that's down from something like near 80% a couple of years ago, down to just over 50%. Right. So it's still a big change. So across the board, and even though Donald Tusk's coalition government is friendly towards Ukraine, it still has to take that into account in terms of domestic politics. And all of this can be seen in the current Patriot interceptor issue, because President Zelenskyy in Serbia at the weekend happened to mention in his press conference that, of course, Ukraine desperately needs these. We all know about that. But Germany and Poland are the countries that have got them, and help from those countries would be very, very significant. He was signalling that they want more. Poland gave 5 of its PAC-3 interceptors out of 208 that it allegedly has, although the numbers are not. They're kind of a secret, but we know how many they ordered. It gave 5 in March. This was before the whole historical grievance issue blew up. It didn't. Nobody knew about it then, and it became a big hot potato a few weeks ago when it came out. And basically, because of this historical grievance issue, the idea of Donald Tusk's government giving any more, even though it would probably like to, it doesn't have the political space to do that. You mentioned President Zelenskyy. I think we've got a short soundbite of him as well talking about this.
First of all, who has anti-ballistic missiles and an anti-ballistic missile system? The manufacturer is the United States. Can they help? We're working on it. Will they supply us with missiles every month? Yes. We have agreements in place. Are these missiles enough? No. Ukraine does not have, nor will it ever have, the sort of funds that Russia has to finance the war. We have what we need, thanks to European aid and support from other countries. But additional funding specifically for Ukrainian production is what's really needed.
Okay, well, additional funding may be needed. That's absolutely understandable. But of course, getting those missiles is really the problem. Whether they're paid for, whether they're manufactured, it's a matter of time. Even if they're manufactured in Ukraine under license, we're talking about at least 3 years, which doesn't help us today. But it's not just Poland, is it, or just Poland and Germany? I mean, Romania, Spain, Greece, all of these countries have been approached as well, and they're all facing exactly the same problem, in that they just don't have any, or they're not prepared to give any to Ukraine because they need them. So essentially, I mean, doesn't this expose a major vulnerability, not only of Ukraine, but of the United States and many countries in NATO?
Yeah, exactly. The United States has got, in its current production, through Lockheed Martin, it produces about 620. It produced 620 in 2005. They want to push that up to 2,000, but that's to replenish their own stocks that they burnt through in the Iran war, plus supply its 16 or 17 customers. You know, that's a lot of countries to divide that. Let's say half go to the States, half go to the 16 countries. That's a lot of countries to divide that 1,000 between. So I think this Patriot. These Patriot procurements that countries made in the last number of years were not designed to provide interceptors for the kind of wave after wave ballistic missile attack that we're seeing in Ukraine at the moment. Russia can produce, analysts from Ukraine think, or rather the military intelligence estimate that they can produce around 100 ballistic missiles a month, and that means that they don't even have to touch their stockpiles, which they have some of. And they're even exceeding, the latest reporting in the Ukrainian media is that they're exceeding their production targets, 110%, 120%. Right. So they can keep this going for some time, yes. And this 100, 120 missiles a month means that they can carry out some of these large ballistic missile attacks involving up to 30 missiles a few times a month, which is a huge amount compared to what we kind of thought of even a few years ago about a missile threat from Russia being maybe 1 or 2 missiles in a signalling attack, and you'd need to have a Patriot battery to destroy a few missiles.
Well, I think the military strategists need to go back to the drawing board and rethink what the threat actually is, because here's Russia, a country under severe sanctions. Supposedly, I mean, there are holes in those sanctions, but nonetheless, being able to manufacture this volume of ballistic missiles for one country. Now, Russia isn't the only enemy of the West. We talk about North Korea, for example, Iran, China is not particularly friendly. The West seems completely vulnerable, completely defenseless against anything that, as simple as simple, but as easily available in quantity as these ballistic missiles. Should the West completely rethink, in your opinion, the strategy in terms of both defensive and offensive capability?
Well, the Patriot systems are a good system, and when you have enough of them, they work. We've seen that.
Yeah, but you need 2 of them for each ballistic missile.
Yeah, so
you produce 620 in a year. That's 300 ballistic. That's less than 1 month's missiles production from Russia.
Yes, that's true. And the missiles that the countries that you mentioned either have in their inventories or on order are really enough to provide that kind of defence against a lower intensity attack. In fact, countries like Poland and Romania really have missiles, I would call in their inventories, not even their stockpiles, because those inventories can put 1 missile in each tube of the multiple launchers that they got. There's not really much more to put in a stockpile. It's just what's in those launchers, and that's why when Poland gave the 5 interceptors in March, that was about 2.5% of its estimated stockpile. But any more would start to really eat into what Poland has, and that's why it was so controversial. But Poland has an order for an additional 800, 850. Other countries have large orders that are waiting to be fulfilled. So,
but they're not going to be filled in the next year or so, are they? It's going to take a bit longer, by all accounts, for those orders to be completed by the United States.
the time that we're talking about now until 2030 is probably a safe time for these countries in Europe. If they keep those missiles, those Patriot systems will offer an effective defence where they are. In Poland, those Patriot systems are stationed to protect Warsaw. They don't provide a whole national coverage. They're a point defence system. But that doesn't really help Ukraine because it needs those weapons right away. Right. And the answers that it's coming up by itself in cooperation with lots of European countries, the Freya weapon that we've heard a lot about, that's still another project which will take a long time.
Which is a Ukrainian and European joint project.
It's a Ukrainian missile, Ukrainian motor propulsion system, but it uses a radar unit, a command and control unit, the other big bits of kit that go into these batteries. But they're talking about having a fireable munition next year and full testing at the end of next year. When these missiles actually can be put into the tubes and fired off every night, it could be a long time.
Right. I mean, it does make one wonder then, if the Patriot or the Freya is really not a viable solution at the moment. What is it that we should be talking about that could be? For example, could it be drones? Because Ukraine has started to produce quite effective, efficient, and cutting-edge technology type drones, which have worked really well. They're long distance and so on. Could they be used, to defend against these ballistic and other missiles?
Well, probably not against the missiles, but certainly against the launchers. I think that's a good area for Ukraine to get into, to try to identify the launch. Firstly, the production facilities, because Russia has really turned around the production of these missiles. It's taken away a lot of resources from other areas, like air defence, and really put them into ballistic missiles because it sees that's where it has its advantage at the moment. So if Ukraine's proved that it can carry out strikes over 1,000 kilometres away. Yeah. It should focus on striking those. Also, the launchers, which some of them are ground-based, some of them are even aeroplanes, and also stockpiles when it's moving around at railway junctions, railway hubs, storage areas. It's probably not doing that effectively at the moment. Otherwise, we would have heard more about it. Right.
I mean, they've been pretty good thus far, haven't they, the Ukrainians, in terms of keeping tabs on where the equipment is going and logistics infrastructure of many of these things, but not with the missiles, it would seem. Also, of course, they face the problem that the launchers are mobile. And so one of our guests was talking about putting these, I believe they're called the EMAC missiles on the F-16s that Ukraine has, but and they could kind of track and take out the mobile missile launchers. But for some reason, those launchers haven't been put on the F-16, and one does wonder why, because that might be a viable solution for the moment, don't you think?
Yeah, I've heard about that as well. That would be a good thing for them to do. And I think it's another case in this war that that there are adaptions and there are adaptions to adaptions. Momentum is swinging from one side to the other. At the moment, Ukraine is really drastically exposed to these strikes, and it looks like they can go on for several months before Ukraine finds some kind of adaptation. But the chances are it will, and then we'll be talking about a different phase.
Yeah, well, the sooner that phase comes along, where they can actually have mount an effective defence against these ballistic missiles, the better, I think. Stuart, as always, thank you so much for sharing your analysis. Pleasure. And that brings us to the end of this episode of News in Depth. Don't go away, lots more coming up. Goodbye.